Welcome to Windows on the World. Yes, tonight the show's called UK Comedy Dystopia. We wanted to give you something to giggle at with all the bad news. It's not all bad news though, but it's just information really. But first of all, I wanted to start off with a story that I've been giggling about for about 4 or 5 days. Basically, let's go right to it. It's about garden gnomes, like from assaults on garden gnomes to assaults on our last remaining rights is really the theme of tonight's show. But this is from several newspapers, and it's all about LBGT gnomes that were abused by a man in a branch of Asda. It says here, a shopper had to be kicked out of Asda by police after becoming enraged about gay pride gnomes. The garden ornaments had been painted in the colours of the rainbow flag, and the man said this offended him. 4 officers attended the Eastover branch in Plymouth, Devon, at around 4:25 p.m. on Saturday, following reports of an abusive male shouting at staff. Eyewitnesses said a man was causing a disturbance over a gnome, sort of gay pride flag colours, which I'm all for. The guy started saying random things like, "It's a gnome, it's offended me," as they don't have a sexuality. No, this is just hilarious, isn't it? Because he's pointing out the obvious. They don't have any sexuality, right? So it kind of ruins the whole thing of gnomes. I've got Sandy Adams with me here, actually. And
hello.
Sandy's going to comment on this. What do you think?
Well, it's a bit daft, isn't it? I mean, we've got a lot more to worry about in the world than LGBTQ gnomes. And, to have this as a headline is crazy, because those gnomes, they're causing lots of hatred, aren't they, really?
Well, all they do is cause hatred and division, gnomes. I don't know whether you've noticed. Well, the picture of the 2 narrative-controlling gnomes is actually more hilarious than the headline, but it's in this particular newspaper, and they've got these 2 very benign-looking, sexless gnomes.
Well,
with
they
these...
are benign and sexless,
that's
aren't
right.
they, gnomes?
Yes. And they've got
they
these
don't need
hats on.
labels.
Not at all. But surely everyone knows that gnomes spread hatred everywhere they go. I mean, this is public knowledge, It's just a divide and rule tactic. They always use it, don't they?
Yes.
They always use it.
I mean, it is a bit daft, and the whole thing is ludicrous, really.
Yeah, they've been targeted by vigilant members of the community for years, though, gnomes.
Oh, gnomes have, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, people have a real, horror of gnomes, don't they? They steal them from people's gardens because they get angry because they're sitting there, fishing. And
exactly, or on a toadstool,
or on a
like
toadstool,
that.
Indeed. Yeah. And I had a friend. I wonder if he's listening. Perry Judge. Perry, when I was at art school, used to steal garden gnomes and take them away when he went on a gap year, and send photographs and postcards back to the house that he stole them from. And so you'd find this gnome had been to the Leaning Tower of Pisa and was found sitting in a deck chair on a Costa Rican beach, and all sorts of silly things. I
think this was a kind of meme of the time, because I remember seeing it on Facebook as well. It's like you take your garden gnome with you,
absolutely,
and you put it in these exotic locations.
Yes.
And I suppose it's better than saying, "Well, look at me, aren't I great? Aren't I having a good time? Here's me dinner." Yeah. It's better, "Well, here's me gnome,"
Exactly, and the poor gnomes. I mean, they do like to get out of the home, don't they? Out of the gnome home. Otherwise, they're sitting in the garden in Thames Ditton fishing, and it's not much fun, is it?
Well, there's a big gnome trafficking thing going on. There always has been, but I think it's much more serious now, because gnomes are often abducted from gardens late night, aren't they? By people who've been to the pub.
They are, absolutely.
I think most of us have done it at one point.
I think they're targeted, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
They are a targeted minority, and I think we ought to set up a support group for them.
Well, that's right. Or they're sometimes left in places that will disorientate the passerby, you see.
Yes.
This is another thing, isn't it?
Yes, that's true.
Well, I think the story really sums up the virtue signalling politically correct idiocracy which we're all living under. The only way out is to associate only with the sane, and that's what we're all here to do.
Please, yes.
Yes, that's right. But we're going to get on something a bit more serious now. Metro UK, armed police protecting Glastonbury festival goers after terror attacks. Now, this is from 2017, and it was about anti-terror police at Glastonbury Festival. Well, let's go forward to this year, to 2019, and a recent news headline from the 27th of June in Somerset Live, which is this live online publication. Now, what's interesting about this story is it was quickly pulled and cannot be found anymore, but somebody we know has taken a screenshot of it and posted it on social media. But basically, it said, highly visible anti-terror armed deployment set for Glastonbury Festival as part of new police tactic Project Servitor. It was then taken down and can't be found. But there was also reports that armed police were attending a local school telling kids about terrorism. Now, if these coppers are armed and they're going into schools, this is all about ramping up fear. And this is total programming, isn't it? And we've now got the programming going into this Glastonbury Festival, because apparently there were hundreds of these armed officers there at the start. Now, I'd like to hear from anybody who was there, who saw this, because this was basically from Wednesday onwards, and it was probably rolled out just before the festival. So it might have been some kind of test, or they were just trying it out. I don't know. But Glastonbury Festival, it said in the article, it quoted a police spokesman, actually, who said they were intelligence-led and could turn up at any place at any time. So this is this Project Servitor, which is made up of police and British Transport Police and City of London Police. We'll get onto that in a minute, but here it said, Glastonbury Festival hosted Operation Servitor. It was announced in the online news and basically propaganda publication known as Online Live. It was in the Somerset edition. So let's have a look at what this Project Servitor actually is. It says Project Servitor, according to them, are police deployments originally introduced by the City of London Police in February 2014 as, quote, new policing tactics to deter and detect criminal and terrorist activity, as well as to reassure the general public. Well, that's all right then, isn't it? But the point here is that armed police do not reassure the public. They put them on guard and they make the public think that they're in danger, which is the whole point of the terror narrative. So I think this is a little bit like those kind of armed to the teeth goons that were put out from about 2014 onwards, because that's when this started. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And it was a rollout in London.
Yes, wasn't it the Olympics? Was it?
Yes, it came after that. And they started having these people, and they had, I called it martial law terror clowns. There's an article on Windows on the World called Martial Law Terror Clowns, and it's got all about this new unit that was set up, a bit like the Territorial Support Group, which is another kind of unit which is employed by the police and works alongside the police, which is like a military part of the police. So this is all kind of interesting that they're rolling it out again at this festival. And it says here, Project Servitor has since been adopted by the British Transport Police, which is a private company based in the City of London, Police Scotland, Essex Police, Ministry of Defence Police. Now that's interesting as well, isn't it? Because MOD police would just be on army bases.
Yeah.
So why would you need armed police making a visible presence when there's loads of soldiers there that are already armed, you know?
Well, also, why can't they have a covert operation? So you've got armed police covertly somewhere on just on standby, so that the public don't get freaked out. It does seem to me that if you're going to do something like that, you could have a special operations unit just kind of in the background, just in case. I mean, I do believe that people need to be protected from various things, but why make it so obvious? Why have them parading around with machine guns or whatever?
That's my point exactly. Yeah. In that, for me, that is what it is, because it's overt, so it's there for a purpose. Yeah. In other words, it's a bit like this idea of the anti-terror police. Well, anti-terror police are no use whatsoever, because they're just sitting ducks for terrorists. So what you'd have somebody who was blending into the crowd, who was armed, who nobody would suspect was undercover or an operative.
Yeah.
That would be anti-terror, wouldn't it? But this is kind of pro-terror, basically.
Yeah, it's a bit of, yeah.
Yeah, the police have used Project Servitor tactics in London on the National Rail Network and at the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, the V Festival, and also, get this, at shopping centres. Now, this is something that I've heard this before, that shopping centres had these sort of armed police in, and it's not an uncommon thing. So if it's happened in your area, write in and tell us. I'd be interested to see how this all joins up. But there was kind of concerns at the Glastonbury Festival this year that something might happen. And also, there's big problems there in the respect of the numbers that seem to be attending. There doesn't seem to be an exact kind of figure for the numbers. Have you noticed this?
Well, there was varying reports of the numbers there. It went from sort of like 190,000 to 210,000 or something, which is actually quite a lot. Yeah. And I don't know. I'm told that Mr. Eavis would like to make it more next year because it's the 50th anniversary of Glastonbury Festival. So, there's a lot of complaints from people locally that it's actually just got too big. And if there was any kind of problem there, it would be a disaster because there's not enough room for people to move. And, it could be very dangerous.
Well, we went up there just before it started. And we went up to one of the camping fields where there was tents, and the tents are in rows, and there's no space between them. You can't walk between the tents. They're set up to get maximum people in there and pack them in. The other thing is that there's a fence all around the field, so the only way out is through the gate at the bottom. So the whole thing is like a holding camp. There's no real way out. So that is a concern, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge concern. Yep.
Yeah, it says here, Project Servitor is an inclusive. Oh, it's inclusive. It's all right then. Oh, it's inclusive.
Inclusive of what?
Well, it's inclusive to everybody. Garden gnomes. It's inclusive, collaborative community strategy that relies on local people.
Don't like the language already.
No, I thought you wouldn't. And businesses to be the eyes and ears for the police. I think I better read that out to everybody again. Project Servitor is an inclusive, collaborative community strategy that relies on local people and businesses to be the eyes and ears for the police. Now, this is rather dangerous because there's many people in and around the community, which whatever you want to call it, who are busybodies or have an agenda, or may even be lobbyists for certain groups. And they're far more likely to go to the police if they're encouraged to, aren't they?
Of course.
And start snitching on people and making things up. And we've all seen examples of this. We have on this show particularly. And the police now don't need any excuse to come in and charge you with something. They'll just do it on the spur of the moment. And this is what's happening. So this really is something much bigger. This is about the kind of martial law strategy that's being imposed. That's what I think. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it sounds, I mean, the whole thing about getting the public to do the policing it smacks of some sort of Stasi where nobody can say anything because, they're scared of saying anything or doing anything.
That's right.
But not necessarily. They wouldn't. It's not as though they're doing anything wrong. But it might be a political opinion. It might be anything. And you're being watched.
Yes, and we're going to get onto that a bit later because that's also a theme of tonight's show. Just carrying on with this though, it says it encourages residents and staff to be vigilant. In other words, promote the fear. And to be the eyes and ears for the police to ensure safety and security. The police have used information campaigns to support these deployments. Yeah, along with things like the prevent strategy, which is basically monitoring the community for this kind of Islamic terror threat, which now, as we know, is the far right. They're calling it the new threat of the far right, which we've discussed many times, which obviously doesn't really exist, but they're trying to push it. And that's really about demonising people who voted Brexit or who may have an opinion outside the narrow corridor of the accepted opinion. So it says here, that these exercises are based on highly visible police patrols designed to identify and deter potential criminal activity, ranging from pickpocketing or theft to more serious crimes, including terrorism. Now, how does this really cross over?
It doesn't cross over for a festival, to be honest. I mean, it's okay. I mean, I can understand them thinking, well, there could be some terrorists that might want to target Glastonbury Festival, but the security there is very good. And it's, at the end of the day, it's about a whole load of people going there to listen to a load of music. It's not, it's not as though it's going to be, somewhere where they can actually use this as a kind of experiment. That's how I feel it is. It's kind of an experiment, really, if they're using armed police. I just don't get it, to be honest.
Well, to me, it looks very much like an intelligence-led exercise because of the wording. Now, let me just tell you what it says here. It says, Project Servitor deployments are characterised by the use of a range of policing assets: dogs, mounted branch, that's horses, firearms, plain clothes, in an unpredictable way. Now that sounds like the Psychological Operations Unit. It's like something that's come out of the MOD.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that historically Glastonbury Festival hasn't needed all this, so why does it need it now? Or I know people say, oh, well, we didn't have terrorism then. Maybe, but we have had terrorism since 9/11, if you want to go down that route.
Yeah.
But, the festival has functioned without all this since then, so why now?
Well, yeah, I mean, the opening story that I read out was from 2017 when there was this threat of terror attacks, but this has just been rolled out this year, and it seems to have kind of gone under the radar. That's why I really brought it up. But it said research indicates that visible policing makes the public feel more reassured, and Project Servitor arrest figures show it as being effective in identifying criminals. Now, how are they identifying criminals? This doesn't make any sense now. That visible policing makes the public feel more reassured. No, it doesn't. It makes the public feel more uneasy.
Yeah, it does. It does, particularly when they've got great big guns. I think when you see a bobby on the beat in your local town, that makes me feel reassured that you've got a bobby on the beat. When you see a sort of paramilitary policeman with a great big machine gun, it makes me feel very uneasy.
Yeah, this was first really rolled out on the railway stations. And the interesting thing about this is they include British Transport Police in this rollout, this Project Servitor. Now, that's interesting in the respect that the British Transport Police are a private company. They don't work for the Crown. They're funded entirely by the railway companies, and the railway companies underwrite them to carry these automatic weapons. Now, the thing is about it is that British Transport Police are not allowed to carry weapons when they're not on railway property. And those weapons, I have it on very good authority, basically by somebody who was busted by British Transport Police and looked a lot of this stuff up, that those guns, when they are taken off the station, have to be put into a locked box by a firearms expert, basically somebody who works within the police as a firearms. So that's a private company, you see.
Yeah.
So they have to have someone from the real police who works for the Crown to transport them.
Oh, gosh, right.
You see what I mean? So what they're doing here is they're blurring everything. So we're going into what is really the overlap of this private policing, where private security and private policing overlap.
Yes.
That's what my point is. And since obviously this, what I'd call facial recognition, not facial recognition, facial recognition.
Because it doesn't work,
Because it doesn't work. It's 97% inaccurate.
Yeah.
I mean, even by the law of averages, how can it be 97% inaccurate? That is so ridiculous. But basically, it's all about trying to identify as many pre-crimes as possible. So I think that's a really interesting one. If you were at the Glastonbury Festival in the first few days from Wednesday onwards and you saw a big armed police presence or some kind of exercise going on, do get in touch, because I'd like to find more out about that, because these stories are starting to trickle in. And as we say, it all contributes to the bigger picture. And talking of the bigger picture, we have some talks coming up. On Monday, 15th of July, I'm just doing one up in Lytham St Anne's, but that's really about the sort of stuff that we've been covering for years, natural law in a post-truth world. But on the 17th of August, the bigger picture, myself, Piers Corbyn and Sandy, are in Carmarthen on the 17th of August, And we're also doing the Glastonbury Symposium, so all three of us will be there. That's on the 28th and 29th of July. And there's another one, the Mad Hatter's Affair. Can you tell us about that, Sandy?
It's a festival in Polegate in Sussex, and it's all about sustainability, which is good. That's fine, but they want to hear the other side of things as well, because a lot of people are beginning to question things, and so we're there to provide the narrative. That isn't the accepted narrative in the mainstream media. So it should be a really nice gathering. It's a very, very nice gathering in a field with lots of recycling going on and lots of all the good stuff, for all of us who do believe in a properly sustainable planet, and but who actually have open minds to realise that perhaps this whole agenda that's rolling out might not be actually very sustainable.
Exactly, and that's what our talks are really about, what the sustainable development agenda really means, the loss of all your rights and all the rest of it. If you haven't heard us before, then look at some of our previous shows, because that is a big story in a bigger picture. And that's what we talk about. So if you'd like us to appear in your local area, do get in touch through the website, windowsontheworld.net. And we'll come and do a talk for you. We've been doing some over the past, year or so, and they've been going very well. And also, I'd like to tell you about... Oh, did we get
We're doing Bosom, aren't we, as well?
That's right. Can we get that one in first? Yeah.
Yeah. And I've forgotten which date we're in Bosom.
Right.
Can you remember? I think it's the 15th of September.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
15th of September, we're in Bosom in West Sussex. So, yes, we're speaking there. Doing our usual thing about the bigger picture and what it means for us as human beings.
Well, absolutely, and this is the thing, that the information that we're putting out does join the dots up to what is really going on, and it's the result of many, many years of research.
Yeah.
But I'd just like to mention another festival which we may or may not be appearing at, because I've just got in contact with these people, and I think we're going to go down there and do some talks. But it's on the 19th to 21st of July, and it's called the Bangers and Mashup Festival, and it's in Redruth in Cornwall, and it's at United Downs Raceway. Bangers and Mashup, they do have sort of stock car racing as well, I think. But what's unique about this festival is that it's for everybody, and they have sort of OAPs, function things going on there, kids things, so it really isn't across the board. But the main thing is, it's run by this chap called Owen, who's a friend of mine, who told me about it, and I got to talk to him, and it's such a fantastic idea. And the idea is that all of these big corporate festivals are too expensive, they're too big, and they're not as much fun. So what he's done is organised a small festival with lots of activity, and it's a £5 to get in. Can you believe that?
It's fantastic. No, that's what festivals used to be like. And, this is what we need to get back to. We need to get back to festivals where people, because none of us have got any money, so we can all turn up and have a jolly good time. And that's what festivals were for, because, it was for people that couldn't afford to go to big gigs,
Absolutely correct. I mean, that's really refreshing to me that someone's doing it. But the thing is, I was talking to Owen yesterday about it. He said, but the problem, Mark, is that people just don't care enough. They don't really care. He said, we're trying to do a fundraiser to put something on, and people just don't want to put their hands in their pockets for anything. Yet, ironically, they will put 200 or 300 quid on something like Glastonbury, when to me that is just a big corporate thing. I suppose that what we're talking about here is the cult of celebrity, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really what it's all about. This idea that people want to go and see these celebrities.
Stormzy and people like that. And a lot of the people that come are high earners, actually. When you look at the glamping or the luxury accommodation that is provided, a lot of people that go, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but it's catering for a very different market.
Yeah, this whole idea of glamping, anyway, it's for people who can't really camp properly, isn't it? It's for people who just want to
rough it.
No, they don't want to rough it. So they don't really camp. It's not really camping, is
I must
it?
admit, I don't really like camping very much. I've got to be honest. But I'll do a camper van. That's fine.
Oh yes, yeah. I'm not really a tent person myself.
No,
unless it's a
no
massive
tents. It's insects for me. I don't like them. Anyway, yeah.
However, moving swiftly
Moving
on. Now, every week I think that headlines in the clown show we call the press cannot get any worse and more comedic. And nearly every week I am not too surprised by the ongoing deterioration of brain cells amongst those who call themselves journalists. Now, this word journalist has now been stripped of its former meaning and is as redundant as those who it is used to describe. So, in this fact-free truth desert, it's a shame that we have to announce we've lost a real journalist, Christopher Booker. Now, Sandy actually refers to Christopher Booker in her talk when she's talking about Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which is this global action plan implemented at a local level. And it's all about land grabbing. So do you want to start off with talking about Christopher Booker?
Yeah, I mean, Christopher Booker, he's, I think he lives in Somerset, doesn't he?
He's dead.
When did he die?
Very recently.
Oh, dear.
Yes.
I know, I didn't know that.
Oh,
Mark.
right. So you can see it's
I'm in
spontaneous,
grief.
this show.
Oh, gosh, I'm in grief. Yeah, no, he's a fantastic bloke.
Yeah.
And he and his journalist friend, Richard North, used to... They wrote a lot of books about Europe in the early days of the European Union, when it was all getting together and when we joined the EEC. And they were they were arch Eurosceptics, and they wrote some very, very eloquent books about the dangers of going into Europe and what it would mean. And it was quite interesting that their whole narrative has always been against the accepted view that we get churned out in The Guardian. And I believe what you're about to talk about is The Guardian, isn't it, Mark?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Yes.
Well, you see, The Guardian, they don't like Christopher Booker because also he really pulled the plug on what happened during the Somerset Levels flooding, and he was quite right, actually. He went into it very, very succinctly and wrote an article in the Telegraph, and it was called "The Deliberate Flooding of the Somerset Levels." And that is really when I'd been reading a lot about the Global Action Plan. But in 2014, when my area got flooded and 65 square miles got flooded, and it wasn't just high spring rainfalls; it was actually policies by the Environment Agency that had caused it, and a general directive from the RSPB and the Environment Agency and the World Wildlife Fund in order to make this a floodplain for birds, for wildlife, really. And all the, I won't go into all the details of it, but actually it all kicked off with a Labour minister in 2009, and he made a policy decision in 2005, and it was actually named Saving the Wetland Habitats under Sustainable Development. And he directed that to comply with the EU's Habitats Directive, in conjunction with the RSPB and the World Wildlife Fund, that actually wildlife would benefit from the increased water levels. Well, we all know what happened. Basically, loads of people lost their houses, their livelihoods. All the wildlife died because all the hedgerows were underwater and all the deers were floating up the River Parrett, and it was a disaster. And Christopher Booker basically blew the whistle on it in the Telegraph, and that's what he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a shame that that you lose someone like that, because the whole thing about journalism, again, you're talking about The Guardian. Well, let's just get on with this anyway, because basically, yeah, Christopher Booker died on the 3rd of July, and The Guardian, they couldn't keep its propaganda and slander off the subject. Anything outside the acceptable brainwashing is just, anathema to them. So basically, I'm going to read out some of what they said so you can comment on it, because I think it really puts into perspective this kind of nasty element that's anything that's outside of their accepted worldview gets derided in this kind of very childish way, but in a very nasty way. And this article is a very good example of that, because it's all about the undermining and basically the ad hominem attack, and also, of course, using logical fallacies, which we talked about the other week. But this is how it started. For nearly 30 years, the discordant sound that Sunday Telegraph readers heard each weekend was the paper's columnist Christopher Booker barking up the wrong tree. Now, who would start off an obituary with a comment like that?
That's wicked. That's really bad.
Yes.
Because he was a very eloquent journalist, and he knew his stuff. And one of the Guardian writers who used to attack him a lot is George Monbiot.
We'll get onto that in a minute.
Yeah.
But it says, but basically, it says who. Well, it's this person called Stephen Bates, this nobody, a programmed scribbler who can't keep his personal and implanted propaganda out of an obituary, which is absolutely disgraceful. It carries on here. Booker, the first editor of the satirical magazine Private Eye, took iconoclasm to extraordinary and frequently eccentric lengths. Now, that's another undermining tactic. When you use the word eccentric, it's usually to undermine somebody. Because what you think of is a shuffling bag lady collecting newspapers or someone like that. This is a very toxic kind of approach that this idiot's taken. And it's a pretty disgusting article, but it's a very good example of what these kind of program drones do. And you see this a lot, don't you? You see it on things like Facebook, where you get these debates going on, and once you start going off the accepted narrative on climate change, for example, they start attacking you in this really childish way. And the next thing is they block you.
Yeah, like Bellamy.
Yes. Yeah, and it's...
They called him an eccentric.
Yes. Yeah, but eccentric, again, used to undermine. But in his weekly columns, it carries on. He regularly annoyed and frustrated scientists, climatologists and doctors with his assertions that asbestos was not dangerous. Now, this again is adding something on, which I don't know whether he even said that. But what they've done is they've taken something, clearly taken something out of context, where they've actually added something onto it and amplified what he said or misrepresented what he said. Now the thing is that I find about all this is that if these newspapers, like The Guardian, had an editor, why is the editor letting out these sort of things? It doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
So, there's a lot wrong with that as well. Climatologist. Well, climatologist is a new thing. Climatologists didn't exist before. No. They were meteorologists before. So this new word came in, climatologist, which seems to cover a whole load of things. So again, that's a very loose association. It's not. Carrying on here, it says speed cameras caused accidents. Well, that's been proven, right?
Yeah.
Speed cameras do cause accidents because people brake sharply. Yeah. This is a known fact. And then the other thing he says is fossil fuels were necessary. Well, fossil fuels are necessary, really.
Otherwise our grid doesn't work.
That's right, because as we know, renewables do not work. The government knows renewables don't work. However, the idiots who write for The Guardian don't know this because they don't do any research. And then it carries on. The next logical fallacy, global warming was a hoax and Darwinian evolution was not proved. Well, Darwinian evolution was not proved, and also it wasn't even supported by Charles Darwin in the end, if you look at his later letters. Darwinian evolution has never been proved.
No.
That's a fact.
That is a fact.
That's a known fact.
And if you don't believe us, go and do your research.
Yes, if you don't believe us, do your research. In actual fact, this is all part of this book, this audio book. I'm writing an audio book, folks.
At last.
Yeah, right, an audio book. Yeah. Well, it's available as an audio book. But I go into all this stuff because this whole area, there's many books where you can get quote after quote after quote, not only from Darwin, but from many scientists about this stuff. And these people are just too lazy to read, But logical fallacies being thrown around like confetti here and lumping together the usual unconnected subjects to attach them to these unrelated things in order to discredit. Now, this opinionated nobody does this frequently throughout the article. I'll just carry on with this because it's such a good example of all of what is wrong with the media. It says Booker's conviction that climate change was a hoax was another long-term obsession. He described government's attempts to reduce carbon emissions as one of the most expensive, destructive and foolish mistakes the human race has ever made.
Here.
Absolutely. Well, of course it is.
Of course it is.
Well, that's true. So it carries on. His many scientific critics, pointing out that he had no such qualifications himself, were infuriated by the simplistic errors he made. Well, where are they? Can you give me some? Have you got any examples of the errors? Because you seem to have given us examples of things that you wanted to bring in that he's allegedly said, but you don't want to actually prove what he actually said. You know, it's incredible, isn't it? So, any examples? No, though not another generalisation. It's just another generalisation to fit the agenda, basically. No, it's what they call reversal. It's the same could be said of the drone who wrote this hit piece. Basically, you know, it's the same thing. But getting onto your favourite subject, George Monbiot, writing in the Guardian in 2011, described Booker as simply a device to waste as much of other people's time as possible. Well, it's pure reversal, right? Because that's all Monbiot does,
ever
isn't
does.
It?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's called mirroring. I mean, this is a full-time lobbyist for globalisation, Monbiot, and he doesn't say anything which is factual. I've never heard him say anything that's factual.
No.
Have you heard him say anything that's factual?
No. If you were to invite him to have a discussion about, I still call it global warming. I don't call it climate change because the climate's changed for billions of years and it will continue to do so. But if you actually did invite him, he wouldn't come because he's got no facts to back up anything he says. That's
right. They just have rhetoric.
Yeah.
But they don't have logic or grammar.
No.
The two things are missing. The two essential things are missing.
And also, he's got awards from the UN for spouting all the nonsense anyway. So.
Of course, he's the ideal useful idiot, but on the other hand, he's just an idiot. But he also said that Booker was a computer program randomly generating nonsense. Now, this sort of stuff is gross. It's ad hominem attacks, and it's not backed up with any facts. And I just think it's a great example of all that's wrong with that media, because the Guardian has this sort of thing in every day of the week, and they attach the most nonsensical, lunatic conspiracy theories to climate change every day of the week.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it carries on. It seems almost impossible that one man could make so many superhuman cock-ups. Now, this is coming from Monbiot. Exasperated at one stage, the head of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change sued him over allegations he had made. Well, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is something everybody should look into because none of their predictions, their models and projections have ever come true. And people start saying, OK, the UN IPCC, so 97% of all scientists are wrong. Well, that was a very skewed kind of representation of what went on anyway. It was just papers that had climate change in the title. So in other words, basically you cherry pick what you want and then you get the result that you intended to get.
Their intention is to make policy. They're not there to do anything other than be government policymakers, the IPCC.
That's what they are. Yeah, they're a lobbying group for globalisation.
Yeah, of course.
So it's like the UN, though. Monbiot has no arguments which would stand up in a debate. But is the idiot to front up the taxation and control agenda? That's what he is. He is the idiot to front that up. But he pretends to know nothing about that either. Now, Monbiot is the ideal tool of the state. He spouts propaganda without facts, then uses it as reversal, like in this attack on one who, unlike him, is able to sort of question the narrative being spewed out by the UN. And it's basically the UN and its PR agencies. I mean, his pieces are just press releases masquerading as news. That's all they are, isn't it? I mean, I get really annoyed about things like that because we can actually get up and stand up and present facts.
Yeah.
And you never get facts in this. I mean, The Guardian, we talk about this a lot because it is the world's most useless newspaper. It's much worse than the Washington Post and New York Times, even though they have their moments pretty much about 4 or 5 days a week. They put rubbish in there about climate change. But however, other news. Let's move swiftly on. The shutting down of everything of value continues, and the controlling of public events is a major concern, right? Now, imagine having to hold secret meetings, keeping venues secret, not for terrorist-related meetups, but for subjects which are in the interests of the public, a bit like our bigger picture talks. Imagine that. Well, it does happen, as we know. Now, basically, here's something, Monday, 15th of July, 2019. Yes, we'll get past that for a minute. Actually, I want to come back to that and get back onto this. Hopefully we'll have time to that. That's a bit about natural law, which I wanted to finish off with. But State censorship carried out by its embedded agents. This is really what we're talking about here. So the latest talks to be shut down in London last week was this Keep Talking group. Now they have so much trouble, this group, and all they do is question the narrative of official events. But because they get negative publicity, their talks are often shut down. Now, they had a meeting it was just a meet-up to discuss the moon landings, right? Now, I'm pretty bored of that, to be honest.
So am I.
Because we've had every theory, unless somebody comes out of the woodwork who worked for NASA at the time and has got some absolutely amazing revelation, then there's nothing more to say on this matter.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've heard most of it, haven't we? Yeah. But it's basically a meeting on the moon landings because one speaker could be linked to something the venue didn't agree with. They lumped together a few other things, such as climate change denial, right?
So hang on. So if you don't believe that we landed on the moon, then you have to be a climate denier.
That's right, because everything has to be in threes, doesn't it?
Oh, yes.
And I suppose you think, oh, yeah. And
a Brexit, obviously a Brexit voter.
Brexit, that's right, yeah. Brexit and, climate change.
Landing on the moon.
And landing on the moon. But these are basically conspiracy theories to shut down free speech, yeah? Now, this is what they're doing. They're using this idea of the word conspiracy theory now to shut down free speech, which is what they actually say in the letter. This was from the London venue that cancelled this meeting to the organiser of the meeting. Dear sir, we received a telephone call on Wednesday the 3rd of July 2019 at 6 p.m. from a concerned member of the public, informing us that your organisation has previously set up various meetings that discuss and agree with Holocaust denial and various other conspiracy theories surrounding terrorist attacks that have taken place throughout the world, as well as climate change denial theories. What's a climate change denial theory?
Yeah, and how can they lump together Holocaust, was it Holocaust denying with...
I think it's to do with one of the speakers. But the point is that what they've done here is they've attached all their own favourite things to it. Or their own controlled narrative.
Also, they've believed it as well.
Exactly.
Which is very interesting that they've taken it on face value.
Well, it's a concerned member of the public phones up, yeah? So that means that if one person, this has happened to David Icke, hasn't it? If one person phones up, then they pull the talk.
Yeah.
Now, what the hell is going on with these people? There seems to be this brainless, kind of spineless approach now, which is anything outside this controlled, stupid narrative, which is completely fake, has to be shut down. And it's all based on fear. It's all based on fear.
Yeah.
It says, on your initial inquiry to the venue regarding hall hire, we were told the meeting was for a self-help group enabling people to discuss their personal issues and problems. Well, it might be. Maybe these people have a problem with the moon landings. And they need to sort it out. It appears that this is not the case, they say. Now, I don't think anyone said that. I don't think that was the point of it at all. But he says, we have done some research into your organisation, and particularly your speaker, and have decided that as a charity and community venue, we cannot be associated with organisations that promote disrespect. Now, how is talking about the moon landings promoting disrespect, amongst others, and unfounded conspiracy theories? Now, they keep going on about this conspiracy theory thing, but surely...
What happened to debate? What happened to free speech? I mean, you can say whatever you like.
Yes.
And does it really matter? You know, at the end of the day, there'll be people there who believe that the moon landings happened and people that don't. What's wrong with that? Why don't, they can have a moon landing off, if you like.
Well, exactly. But
there's nothing wrong with it.
This has happened to us as well, and we'll get onto that in a minute, which says, therefore, under a management decision, we will be unable to accommodate your meeting tomorrow and have refunded you. The decision is final, Yours sincerely, Jackie, the administrator. Now, there was a long response from the meeting's organiser, but in the intolerant world of the PC, fear-driven, virtue-signalling drones of the Stasi, it was ignored. Our public interest talks, the bigger picture, have also been pulled by self-righteous minions of the Fuller's pub chain. I'm not blaming everybody who works for Fuller's here, but one person in that pub chain shut down our meeting and there was no recourse. Basically, let's have a look at this, because this is another important one. It was to someone called Jonathan Swift, care of Sarah Keough, please forward to your legal department. This is what I wrote to them after they decided to pull our talks. Now, do you remember this, Sally?
I do.
Yeah.
I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Sally was trying to organise it, and she got very frustrated, quite rightly, because they just wouldn't let us talk, and they wouldn't. At first, they didn't answer, and then you sent this. You didn't get a reply from them, did you?
No.
No.
I said, final chance to remedy. The lack of response to the email below, sent on 2 separate occasions, has been noted. The personnel involved are as follows. A woman called Janine Nunes. None of this means anything to anybody, but she's the general manager. And she told this person who booked the venue that the event had been cancelled. Now, basically, then it goes on to this woman called Ali Neal. This is one I had to deal with, operations manager of pubs and bars. She's the one who allegedly pulled the event. Now, basically what happened was the lady who'd booked the talks for us, our talks, had talked to them on the phone, and they'd say, yeah, sounds great. And then, at the last minute, this person's turned round and said, no, you can't come here, and with no reason given.
And it was literally a week. Was it a few days? I can't remember. It was. I know it was quite near to the talk. Yeah.
Yeah. It says if no satisfactory response is received to the email below, the matter will be escalated and made public, which is what we're doing anyway. That Fuller's staff are censoring and cancelling an event which was accepted by the venue and was in the public interest. That's the point. So this is what I wrote to her. We have so far not received any satisfactory explanation or answer to the questions raised, and your email further obfuscates the matter. As stated, if we do not receive a satisfactory explanation, we will have to assume that the venue has discriminated against the public interest talks, which it has. The venue staff have told us that no event would be cancelled by the venue unless it was by those that booked the venue, or the event was financially viable. Now, that's what was told afterwards by the fella who was there, you see.
Right, okay.
So, in other words, this is a political decision that they've decided to take, or one person's decided to take, you see, because there's no recourse when you get to any high-ups in this organisation, this Fuller's pub chain. They've been extremely unhelpful, and they pulled our talk at the last minute without giving even a reason. Okay, the dafties, the what do you call them?
Useful idiots.
The useful idiots, the neoliberals, the virtue signallers, the politically correct fearmongers who actually pulled the previous one, actually did give a reason. But these idiots have not given any reason. And get this, it was stated by this Janine Nunes that she did not have to give a reason. So how can you take the money, say, yeah, sounds great, we want that, or we're going to cancel it, no reason. Now, if you did that at a venue, they'd say, look, I'm really sorry, we've double booked. I'm really sorry, and they'd offer you another date, right?
Yes.
So this is totally disingenuous, Fuller's pubs, by the way. Absolutely disgusting behaviour. So we won't be using Fuller's pubs for any of our meetings in the future. So, yeah, moving swiftly on, because we are now, we're getting into the last part of the show. If anyone out there thinks that Britain is in any way a democracy where the state looks after the rights of its citizens, the shows we have done exposing the likes of the new UK Stasi, such as the Institute for Strategic Dialogue and the Research Information Communications Unit, along with lobbying groups, think tanks and NGOs which control the narrative of their information, this will be of interest to you. Now, these organisations plant this anti-Russian propaganda, along with, of course, anti-Corbyn propaganda, along with demonising anything else which might stray from the Reuters PR narrative or the constant trivia being pumped out. Now, this takes us on to a very interesting story which has resurfaced, and it's an organisation called the Institute for Statecraft, which describes itself as an independent UK-based charity. Aren't there a lot of these charities doing dirty work these days?
Absolutely, yeah, they are. And it sounds really sinister.
Yes.
Statecraft.
Yes, but they all do. The Institute of Strategic Dialogue.
Yeah.
This is like something out of the psychological operations group
yeah.
in the army, right?
Yeah, absolutely,
the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, the Research, Information and Communications Unit. Now, these sound kind of military. They sound like military intelligence, and in a way they are,
it is,
as we have covered in the shows. But this Institute for Statecraft It's a UK-based charity whose work seeks to improve governance. Oh, that's all right then, isn't it? And enhanced national security. Now, the thing is that the national security issue is about the financing and the controlling of the narrative for the sake of the financial asset, which is the country, the corporation. So it's nothing to do with what's good for the population. It's what's good for the controlling of the narrative in order for the country to keep its financing and keep its war machine going. That's what this is all about. National security means exactly that. It means how the country is able to control its military narratives, right? And everything else. It runs a project called the Integrity Initiative, does this Institute for Statecraft.
Says who?
They do. Oh, it's good. The thing is, it is like 1984 speak, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everything that these organisations are doing now, the Integrity Initiative, which is working to counter disinformation overseas by bringing together groups of experts to analyse and discuss the problem posed by Russian disinformation. Now, in actual fact, what they got caught doing was putting stuff out on Twitter that's blaming everything on the Russians.
Yeah.
So if it's Corbyn, he must be working for Russia. And it's so childish and so ridiculous, it all got exposed. Now, Chris Williamson, the MP who's now been kicked out of the Labour Party for the second time, did an investigation into this. And it says, basically, let's have a look at what this is about before we really get into it. The government are funding this initiative with nearly £2 million this financial year. I think this was 2017-2018, okay?
So that's our money?
Yes.
Yes.
That funding covers its activity outside the UK and it does not fund any activity within the UK, allegedly. But it's been caught out, right? Because this Integrity Initiative is doing it in the UK.
Okay.
You know, which is an offshoot of it.
Yeah.
He says, nor does it fund the management of the Integrity Initiative's social media account. Now, wait a minute. Well, who is funding it then? Because if the actual Institute for Statecraft is a kind of holding organisation for the Integrity Initiative, well, that's totally contradictory then, isn't it?
Yes,
it's totally
it
contradictory
is, yeah.
what they're saying. Nor does it fund the management of the Integrity Initiative's social media account. Recent reports that Foreign Office funding has been used to support party political activity in the UK are therefore wholly untrue. Now, this is where it gets interesting, right? According to the handbook, the Integrity Initiative aims to bring to the attention of politicians, policymakers, opinion leaders and other interested parties, and who they are, the threat posed by Russia to democratic institutions in the United Kingdom, across Europe and North America. And it has achieved this by organising a network of clusters across Europe and North America. These clusters are made up of people who understand the threat posed to Western nations by a flood of disinformation. Well, what they class as disinformation is, of course, anything opposing the agenda that's been basically imposed through the media and through the agenda which is being pushed by the national global interests. You know.
I mean, it's a bit like this whole thing about the threat of the far right. It's very similar, you know, the whole Russians under the bed thing. I mean, we've just had it thrown at us constantly, you know, with and Corbyn's being discredited for anti-Semitism and pro-Russian stuff, and everyone's throwing the whole Russian debate around.
Oh, yeah. But it says the Institute for Statecraft defines statecraft as the skillful, effective and strategic employment of all forms of power. Well, this is very much like intelligence stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
In other words, it's the trade here is treachery.
Yeah.
Right? It's about subversion and using lies and manipulation to get what you want into the narrative. That's what they're saying. They claim to promote peace and security through the skillful use of state power, it says here. The skillful use of state power, and to have over 90 fellows who specialise in the fields of security and intelligence, although not all are listed on their website. Some of their published work is sponsored by NATO's Public Diplomacy Division.
It's like a psychological operation, really. It's a totalitarian to me, it feels like a
That's exactly
totalitarian
what it is.
psyop. Yeah.
According to the handbook, the Institute for Statecraft gets its funding from multiple sources to ensure its independence. Oh, yeah. These
Right.
the stakeholders, you see.
Yeah.
These include private individuals. Oh, I see. Charitable foundations. Well, how can they do that? How can they be using...
Where do they raise their money for this particular, to get money
And
from
why would
charities?
charitable foundations be
Give money,
involved in
yeah.
propaganda?
Exactly.
They shouldn't be involved in propaganda. International organisations fund it. Here we go.
Well,
the
maybe
EU,
it's-
NATO.
There you go. Well,
An MOD,
That's where they're getting
of
the
course.
money from.
So
Yeah.
it's an MOD thing.
Yeah.
And it's NATO, obviously, because of that. What are the countries involved where they said
And
that
the
at the beginning.
EU,
Yeah. Confirmation of foreign and Commonwealth funding is made in the Integrity Initiative statement mentioned above. It says here. For the first 2 years, the Integrity Initiative was funded by private individuals, funding for 2017 and 18, provided by a grant from the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office. This reflects their appreciation of the importance of the threat. What threat? What threat? They don't define what the threat is. This is the point. What is the threat they're talking about? It's not defined. So the threat can be anything.
Yeah.
That means that they use and promote disinformation and propaganda against anybody or over anybody that they do see as a threat. Now, what they perceive as a threat is probably us. Because we're the ones who are having our talks shut down. We're the ones who are saying things which we are stating are in the public interest, which are in the public interest, but these people don't seem to agree. So it says the websites of both the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft now say, get this. Now, this is recent, yeah? And this is after this expose that Chris Williamson did on them. This is what it says on the Integrity Initiative website. Go and look it up, folks. All content has been temporarily removed from this site pending an investigation into the theft of data from the Institute for Statecraft and its programme, the Integrity Initiative. Initial findings indicate that the theft was part of a campaign to undermine the work of the Integrity Initiative in researching, publicising and countering the threat to European democracies from disinformation and other forms of hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare.
What?
This is all MOD psychological operations speak,
It is
isn't it?
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, from disinformation, other forms of hybrid warfare.
Sounds a bit like the Chindits.
That's right, yes. Controlling the narrative on Facebook and all social media. But he says, the website will be relaunched shortly. In the meantime, we expect to be able to publish an analysis of the hack and its significance in the near future. Now, what's the betting? They're going to blame the hack on the Russians.
Yes, of course.
Or what about, even more apt, Jeremy Corbyn? Blame it on him, right?
Blame it on poor old Jeremy.
And the Institute of Statecraft says the same thing. But it carries on the Institute of Statecraft. It actually says, we are keen to trace both the source of the hack and the use to which our data, some genuine, some falsified, has been put. Wait a minute. So you're saying that you've got falsified data on there? I mean, the thing...
They're really stitching themselves up, actually.
Well, it's great. Well, it's typical of, like, the MOD, you know. It's like when they said about this 7-7 Brigade, which is basically... Yeah, the
yes
Chindits.
and no.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. So basically it said, well, the Army magazine asked if this was a psychological operation against the public, and the Army captain said, well, no, and yes. But it says, if you would like to register your support for the work of the Institute of Statecraft and its programmes, or to receive information from us about forthcoming events, reports or briefings, please click here. Please continue to follow our news and content on Twitter and Facebook.
Unbelievable.
Now, something which may throw some light on all this is the expose by MP Chris Williamson, which was published in the Morning Star, not our favourite newspaper, but it's quite a good article. He says here, this was in January 2019. Now, has this got anything to do with the fact that they've pulled everything off it? Because they've been exposed, basically.
Yeah.
The chilling manipulations of the Institute for Statecraft are straight out of the Cold War playbook. This is from Chris Williamson. Over the past couple of months, I have been investigating the activities of the Institute for Statecraft and its so-called Integrity Initiative after some of its dubious actions were highlighted. After some in recently published hacked documents, they have registered premises just outside the Scottish village of Auchtermuchty and an office suite in an exclusive location near Temple Station in central London. In response to one of my parliamentary questions on December the 3rd, Foreign Office Minister Alan Duncan said, The Institute for Statecraft is an independent Scottish charitable body whose work seeks to improve governance and enhance national security. They launched the Integrity Initiative in 2015 to defend democracy against disinformation.
Rubbish! Oh my goodness. That's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.
The problem is that this charitable body hasn't confined itself to that and has strayed into smearing Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, which is why Chris Williamson got involved.
Yeah.
These tactics resemble those deployed by the CIA in Operation Mockingbird that was launched at the height of the Cold War in the early 1950s. Its aims included using the mainstream news media as a propaganda tool. Now, we've done show after show about this stuff, and we did a show the other week about propaganda, a book by Jacques Ellul, all about how propaganda works. And propaganda works best on those who are already indoctrinated, such as academics, such as these idiots who work for The Guardian. That's what propaganda really works for. And, of course, that's the idea, but let's carry on. Interestingly, the mainstream media has been rather tardy in its coverage of the revelations contained in the hacked documents. Well, of course it has, because they get their stuff from Reuters and Associated Press, and they read out their press releases. He carries on. I would have thought an international network of politicians, journalists, academics, researchers and military officers associated with this British-based project might have merited more than a passing mention on the BBC. But
You'd think.
Well, I wouldn't. The fact that this charity has gone well beyond defending democracy against disinformation. And, well, that's just defending democracy against disinformation. That is just classic MOD speak. And it's self-indulging in disinformation against the Labour Party and its leader seemingly isn't newsworthy to mainstream media editors. Well, of course it's not. And this Chris Williamson will know more about that now than anybody else after what's happened to him.
Yeah.
He says, even more so after I discovered through a series of parliamentary questions that since 2017, the Foreign Office has given more than 2.2 million to the Institute for Statecraft's Integrity Initiative.
I don't think it sounds like integrity.
It doesn't, does it? And also the thing is that, again,
it's a lot of money,
it's the government who are paying people in the public sector to openly blame Russia and spread disinformation to the British public.
Yeah.
So they're openly admitting that they're working as a Stasi operation. That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Their report sets out the activities of the Integrity Initiative and makes for chilling reading. It refers to manipulation of the public sphere, including campaigns to smear and suppress dissenters and block their appointment to public office. Now, it doesn't get any worse than that.
It doesn't get any worse. That is truly a Stasi. That is a totalitarian sort of tactic, isn't it? That's hideous.
But people still think that they have rights in this country. When you see this stuff, you realise how far things have gone.
Yeah.
Let's carry on. We're a bit over time, but it doesn't matter. They cite overt attacks on British politicians, academics and other critics of Westminster government policies, right? Most notably on the leader of the opposition and his staff. The report also states that covert networks or clusters of journalists and academics are being established alongside a critical mass of individuals.
Wow.
How are they achieving that?
Wow.
In think tanks.
Think tanks. We know all about think tanks.
Yeah, like Demos, politics, government and the military, whose work is mutually reinforcing. So we're talking here about a psychological military operation against the public that's openly funded by the United Kingdom government to the point of 2.2 million, plus all of the other stakeholders, lobbyists and people who are interested in controlling the narrative of your public opinion, paying these people to control the narrative on social media, and that's the bottom end of it. At the top end of it, they're saying that they're going to take out anybody they don't like. Now, what's the difference between that and Shai Masot, the Israeli agent who went openly into saying on camera, all right, it was a secret recording, that he could take down senior politicians in the Labour Party or the British government. Now, what's the difference? It's the same thing. So, okay, he's a spy. He got deported back to Israel, but we're doing it anyway. So it doesn't make any difference.
It's diabolical.
They
it
all
really
work
It's
together.
Diabolical. Yeah.
The efforts of this state-funded charity are not confined to Britain. I have recently written to the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, about the campaign launched by the Integrity Initiative last summer against the appointment of Pedro Banos as the director of Spain's Department of Homeland Security. The group's Spanish cluster succeeded in blocking Banos' appointment by relentless public hostility, and at least one Tory MP took to Twitter to join in the attacks. OK, that's trivial, but what they're saying there is they're interfering in international politics now. Although precisely why a Conservative MP who represents the Isle of Wight should publicly seek to damage a candidate for internal Spanish governmental appointment is rather puzzling. It goes on, when I asked Alan Duncan what on earth a government-funded British-based charity was doing interfering in the internal appointments of a fellow European democracy, he completely failed to answer. Oh,
Of course.
Well, just for a change. I'm blocking you on Twitter with immediate effect. Yes. In fact, the government has rebuffed most of my questions about the Institute for Statecraft and the Integrity Initiative. Now, this was before they've taken down the websites, by the way, you see.
Yeah.
So they've been rumbled here,
Yeah.
massively.
Yeah, hugely, yeah.
And what they're doing is they're now going to say, we were hacked. We've been hacked by the Russians. We told you. Or with Jeremy Corbyn. Or maybe it's Windows on the World, you know.
Maybe it's gnomes.
That's
Can
right.
we talk about gnomes again?
I'm going to report you to the gnome office. Have you got no gnomes to go to? Ministers responded by saying things like documents and correspondence about projects within the programme will not be published, as this information could then be used to actively attempt to disrupt and undermine the programme's effectiveness. In other words, that's absolute propaganda. To basically attack people with. In other words, that, oh no, we couldn't tell you because then we'd be playing into the hands of the enemy. What a ridiculous thing to say.
Absolutely. It's stupid.
Consequently, I tried to obtain some answers directly from the people behind this charity, and so last month I visited both premises in Scotland and London. I arrived at the address in Auchtermuchty after dark to find it is located at the end of an isolated dirt track. Sounds like Windows on the World.
It does. Yes, exactly. Secret
Sounds like
location.
Windows Towers.
Yes. At the end of a dirt track, that's where we are.
But incidentally, folks, we haven't got 2.2 million, so if you do...
No, that would be good.
If you do want to make a donation for the... okay, all right, I do buy diesel fuel. Sorry about that. but it's clean diesel, honestly. Go to windowsontheworld.net and press the donate button, because we do need to get about. But let's get back to business. So it says, when I visited their office in London the following week, the door was slammed in my face when I explained I wanted to ask some questions about their activities. And you can see that actually in that Morning Star article. But it goes to the door and the bloke just slams the door in his face. Now, wait a minute. If these have got 2.2 million off the British government, these are public servants.
Yes, yeah.
What the hell is going on here? As the prospect of a socialist government is now a real possibility, says Chris Williamson, even a probability, well, not anymore. This was in January. Corbyn's completely crashed and burned since then. It seems that vested interests will stoop to all manner of dirty tricks and smears to prevent that eventuality. Well, they don't have to now because Corbyn's done it himself, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
That is why it's important to expose organisations like the Institute for Statecraft and the Integrity Initiative, because they are incompatible with an open democracy. So basically, that was from him. And I just think that is absolutely incredible. But on the attendees list were Chris Donnelly, a senior fellow at the Defence Academy of the UK, Daniel Lafayette. He did not identify himself. Oh, I see. He identified himself as representing BICOM. Yeah, okay, yeah. So we can see how the Israelis and the UK are completely united in their disinformation campaign here. That's absolutely clear, right? The Britain-Israel Communications and Research Centre, a pro-Israeli advocacy, organisations with very close links to UK Conservative Party, well, all parties, via Podjud Zavludovic. He's founded BICOM and he's a former chairman. He funded David Cameron's Tory leadership campaign. Yes. So, this goes now into the directors, but I would actually recommend that people look at that and also look at this Institute for Strategic Dialogue. It's all the same kind of stuff. What they're doing is controlling the narrative of public opinion at every level they can. But the point is that it's not just propaganda, it's about the smearing of individuals by the UK government, which is absolutely out of order. So, in other words, anything that doesn't go along with the new totalitarianism is going to be absolutely trashed. including us. So my thought is that we have these small meetings and we start to form groups and we use the information that we get. And that's what our talks are all about. Have you got anything to say, Sandy, in conclusion? Because I've been talking for a long time.
Oh, I'm depressed. I'm going to have to go and kick a gnome, I think. I know. I just feel that. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely hideous. What you know this what you've just been talking about, because it really hits home that free speech is getting really outlawed in this country, and we've got to be very careful about how we go about what we do, because, you know, I'm not fearful, because nobody will ever tell me to shut up, and I'm sure you feel the same way. But knowing that you've got these organisations that are public, you know, government funded, and you know they're just trying to shut us down, basically. There's, you know, it's a bit like being in you know, some sort of terrible regime like Pol Pot, you know, where your freedom of speech is just not allowed. It's horrible.
Yeah, and it's sinister because it crosses over from public to private, and that's where all of this stuff seems to be very problematic. So you've got the public and the private sector. It's a bit like what we call the change agents, the people who are embedded in communities. They're trained in both the public and the private sector. So in other words, you've got the government and the corporations doing it, and they all work together. And that is a recipe for the destruction of anything that people would call democracy, even though we know that doesn't really exist. But the point is that when you get these organisations using these openly subversive military terms and tactics, and openly saying they're doing it, then that means that we are in a totalitarian regime, because only a totalitarian regime would admit that, because in any form of what you'd call a democracy, there would be an uprising against it. And the mere fact that there isn't proves that this narrative has been so controlled that if there is any dissent, it's certainly not being able, well, it's not being allowed to rise to the surface through any form of media.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point, is that, I mean, I'm quite heartened that, you know, certain things are bubbling up, but it's only the alternative media. But there will be a time when I think there'll be a critical mass and it'll tip over into the mainstream media if we continue what we're doing, because we have to. It has to come through. It has to somehow come to a critical mass of people that are listening to the alternative media, where it tips into the mainstream media at some point. And if it doesn't, then you're going to just get clusters of people who are literally against what's happening. And, you know, we will have to fight for our freedom of speech.
Yes, and the good news is that The Guardian is begging for money and not getting it.
Good. Yeah, every time I open up the computer, they're begging for money, and I'm not surprised they're losing readership.
Yeah, well, the Institute for Statecraft aren't doing very well controlling the narrative for them, because the actual responses when they ask for money is basically telling them where to go.
Yeah.
And nobody seems to read it. But maybe people read it in the southeast. I don't really know anybody who reads it anywhere else. Maybe it's just people in the southeast who read it. What do you think? Because I don't know anyone who reads it.
I don't know anyone that reads The Guardian. I think a lot of people read it in London because they do. And that London is not the rest of England. London is almost like a different county of people that don't really think the way the rest of England do, actually.
Well, there's a lot more programming going on there.
Yeah, huge amount.
In conclusion then, watch out for LBGTQ garden gnomes, and also we'll be back next week. Remember that, we'll be back next week at 9 p.m. And do check on the website for our talks. I'm going to be putting them all up tomorrow. So the new show will also be up there, and all our shows are. They're on the archive at windowsontheworld.net in the live shows section and in the videos section. So that's it from us, myself and Sandy Adams. And until next week, good night.
Good night.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World Live every Sunday, 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.